At 30, Wojak's life felt like a relentless downward spiral. He'd been laid off from his job 6 months ago, his bills were piling up, and his debts seemed insurmountable. Each day was a new struggle, and with his ailing mother's health to care for, Wojak felt hopeless. He'd tried everything, odd jobs, late nights, even selling his car, but it wasn't enough. The American dream had turned into a nightmare for Wojak, and every moment he was haunted by the sense of failure. One cold evening, after another fruitless day of job hunting, Wojak wandered into a dimly lit bar in Chicago's rough South Side. He nursed a cheap drink, his thoughts tangled in regret and anxiety. As he sat there, a figure moved into the seat beside him, a tall, sharply dressed man with piercing eyes and an air of authority. The man introduced himself as Tony Russo, a name that Wojak had heard whispered around town. Tony was known as a local mob boss, someone you didn't cross lightly. His voice was smooth and inviting, a dangerous charisma radiating from him. "You look like a man with troubles," Tony said, giving Wojak a scrutinizing look. "I can help with that." Wojak looked at him, the desperation in his heart beginning to stir. Tony offered him a job, promising good pay. No questions asked. The details were vague, but the allure of money was too strong. After all, Wojak thought, he had little left to lose. From that night, Wojak was gradually pulled into the Mafia's world. He started with small, seemingly harmless tasks, delivering messages, running packages to undisclosed locations, standing watch while deals were made in the shadows. The cash came quickly, and soon he was able to pay off some debts and afford his mother's medical expenses. For the first time in years, Wojak felt a glimmer of hope, a sense of security he hadn't felt in a long time. But the jobs became more dangerous, and the moral lines began to blur. One day, Tony called him in for a meeting at a secluded warehouse. Tony's tone was different this time, colder, more demanding. "There's a job that needs doing, Wojak," Tony said, handing him a loaded gun. "We got a witness who's been running his mouth to the feds. We need him silenced." Wojak felt the weight of the gun in his hand, the cold metal sending a shiver down his spine. His stomach twisted, and he tried to hide the fear on his face. This wasn't what he had signed up for. He had never imagined himself becoming a killer, but he knew that refusing would mean serious consequences. That night, Wojak found himself outside the witness's modest apartment. The street was eerily silent, the city lights casting a faint glow on the cracked sidewalks. He walked up the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a point of no return. With a trembling hand, he knocked on the door, his mind racing. The door opened, revealing a man who looked as terrified as Wojak felt. He couldn't do it. Wojak lowered the gun, his heart pounding. "I'm not going to hurt you," Wojak whispered, turning away from the apartment. His mind was in chaos, the adrenaline mixing with a sense of relief and terror. He had crossed Tony, and he knew what that meant. Wojak returned to the bar where he had first met Tony, determined to confront him. Tony was there, waiting, as if he'd anticipated Wojak's return. His face was a mask of fury, his voice laced with venom. "You think you can back out now, Wojak? There's no walking away from this life," Tony hissed. "You know what happens to people who betray me." Wojak squared his shoulders, finding a strength he didn't know he had. "I won't be your puppet, Tony. I won't lose what little I have left." The air was tense, the bar quiet as they stared each other down. Wojak knew he was risking everything, but in that moment, he didn't care. He was done being controlled, done compromising his soul for survival. Tony sneered, but he could see the resolve in Wojak's eyes. "Fine, but remember, you're on your own now." Wojak walked out of that bar, knowing he had just burned a bridge he could never rebuild. The threat of Tony's retaliation lingered over him, a shadow that would follow him for the rest of his life. Yet, as he stepped onto the cold Chicago streets, he felt a strange sense of freedom. He had finally reclaimed his own destiny, no matter the cost. Back at home, Wojak hugged his mother, promising her a better life, vowing to find honest work. The road ahead would be difficult, and he might always have to watch his back. But he had made his choice, and for the first time, Wojak was living life on his terms. The dangers would be there, but so would his